Last month, a long-running court case against Angolan journalist Rafael Marques came to an end. 7 Angolan generals had sued Marques for defamation after he accused them of torture and human rights abuses in his book, Blood Diamonds, Corruption and Torture in Angola. Marques was found guilty and given a 6-month suspended sentence. He called it a blow to freedom of expression in the country, saying, "It's sending a message that we can lock you up anytime we want."
I have faced threats, I have faced imprisonment, I was beaten up. The reason why I continue, it's because I believe that as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, it is my duty to do the right thing.
Rafael Marques is known for investigating and disclosing inconvenient issues for the government. Is mainly concerned with human rights and corruption. This work is recognized internationally, so it's not surprising that he has been targeted by the Angolan elite.
Marques is a touchy subject in Portuguese media as well. Up until 2014, Mário Crespo was a news anchor on the privately owned channel SIC Noticias. Earlier this month, he wrote an op-ed in daily newspaper Público, explaining how when he interviewed Marques, he was warned of the problems it would cause. He said this pressure was exerted to, quote, avoid offending Angolan money. Coverage on Angola and its elite has caused problems in Portugal before.
E faz todo sentido nesse aspecto continuar, eu diria, aprofundar as parcerias.
3 years ago, the country's leading broadcaster, RTP, aired a 2-hour talk show featuring businessmen and politicians from both countries discussing their growing relationship.
Os palhaços ricos e figuras grotescas do folclore local.
Journalist Pedro Jose Mendes later called it a disgusting piece of political propaganda on a radio show called Este Tempo. Este Tempo was cancelled a week later, but RTP insisted it had been planning to pull the plug for a while.
There are the cases of open censorship, of even a certain amount of retaliation against free-spirited journalists. But the most frequent outcome is by far self-censorship and careful accommodation with the status quo.
Angola is almost a taboo subject in Portugal, especially when something is bad for the Angolan government. Given the constraints, the most sensitive issues are not covered or are not covered deeply enough.
Portuguese media are increasingly monitoring and scrutinizing what's happening in Angola. That's because Angolans are the biggest foreign investors in Portugal. Portuguese media covered the country's civil war, and even though there were a few quiet years after that, the recent increase in Angolan investment has put the country back in the spotlight.
According to some estimates, Angolans have invested between 10 to 15 billion euros in industries ranging from banking, construction, telecommunications and energy. When it comes to the media, some key figures stand out. The eldest daughter of the Angolan president, Jose dos Santos, and mining and oil magnate António Mosquito. While there are no records of dos Santos' shares in the Portuguese media, analysts say that Mosquito acts as her proxy, and he is listed as owning stakes in Global Media Group that owns 4 newspaper titles, including prominent daily journal De Noticias and TSF Radio. Then there's Álvaro Sobrinho, who made his name in banking. Sobrinho is the main shareholder in media conglomerate Newshold, which owns the Weekly Soul and Daily Eye.
It started as a strategy from a Portuguese banker to help a Portuguese politician with Angolan money. And then Angolans learned that it worked pretty well, so they said, okay, we want this venue for our propaganda as well. And that's how Angolans then became quite prominent in acquiring shares in the Portuguese media.
The question that matters is, why do they invest in Portuguese media? The thing is, what's published in Angolan newspapers doesn't have the credibility of what's published in Portugal. So their strategy is to influence the Angolan public opinion through what's printed in Portugal. If one controls the media in Portugal, it will control the public opinion in Angola.
Angola, a country of 20 million, gained independence from Portugal in 1975. A civil war was fought until 2002, and one man has ruled the country for 36 years, Jose Eduardo dos Santos. Despite being one of Africa's largest producers of oil and rich in diamonds, the wealth hasn't trickled down, with nearly 40% of the population living below the poverty line. The country's record on press freedom is poor. It ranks 123 out of 180 in the Reporters Without Borders' latest Press Freedom Index. The media environment is tightly controlled by the government in Luanda. The private media outlets are owned by those with ties to the government, and dissident voices are curtailed.
For a long time, there was a sort of division of labor whereby the government accepted some pluralism, especially in the print media, because it just didn't circulate much outside Luanda, whereas the radio and television were and remain tightly controlled. Over the last 5 years, even those print media outlets have been curtailed because the government started to realize that they still circulate to an influential segment of public opinion.
What remains of non-controlled government media is very negligent in terms of serving the people. We have one independent newspaper, buoyed. It doesn't print nowadays more than 5,000 copies a week, and so it does not have an outreach. And each newspaper costs around 500 kwanzas, which is equivalent to $5, which is extremely expensive for the majority of the people. The economic pressure and the fact that the government was able to buy through proxy companies what existed of independent media has resolved the problem of censorship.
The Santos government has had a firm grip on the Angolan media for nearly 40 years. Now, as Angolan money and influence spreads over Portuguese media, the question is, how deep will the impact be on the journalism there?
We can now clearly see a pattern of political intrusion, of influence, designed both to curtail the space for legitimate discussion of Angolan-related issues, but most importantly, present very proactively a certain Angolan-friendly way of being in the world. This is a very serious concern, and in the medium term, it's obviously a threat to Portuguese media freedom more generally.